Okay, hi friends. So it's finals week. And yet here I am. I could be doing productive things right now, but uh that's for suckers, right? So instead I'll be doing this wonderful test um where we will figure out just how tanky I am, I guess, and if you guys want to hate me, then you can do it for specific reasons now. Like, I don't like your answer to question 30 or whatever. So if you don't know what LeftValues is, LeftValues is a political test, like a political ideology test, which is structured much like eight values, which maybe I'll also take if this is something that wants to be seen. So eight values is like a bunch of different axes that sort of like conservative, progressive, environmentalist, or whatever, like all these various like spectrums on issues, and it's very specific and very compartmentalized and categorical results of what your ideology is. And this one is just that, but for left wingers. So it's all of the various leftist ideologies like democratic socialism and anarchism and Leninism and all that. Yeah, so I think there are about 72 questions on the test, and I wanted to do it. So I don't know. Let's do it. Click the button with your opinion. Yep, that's pretty easy. Okay. Reforming capitalist society to achieve better rights for workers is desirable. Yeah, I'm not an accelerationist. I don't know how much I should explain my answers. I guess a lot, so this is probably gonna be a long video. I'm for things like increasing the minimum wage and like trying to scale back U.S. military activity and all of that under the current liberal order. I think it's possible to get, like, to gain ground on that front. And I also think that it makes our groups, which are fighting for those things, it makes us like more palatable because we get actual things done. And also it makes us, I don't know, it puts us in the public eye. You know what I mean? Like, so the Democratic Socialists of America, whatever your opinion on them is, like, they had a massive spike after Bernie Sanders called himself a Democratic Socialist, for example, which I know is like a totally optics thing. But I think that similar things, especially on a local level, can be said when groups like the DSA fight for like higher minimum wage or things along those lines. So I'm going to put strongly agree on this one because, yes, I do want to make things better in the short term as well. Revolution is the best way of achieving a socialist society. I mean, not necessarily violent, like, let's all storm the Capitol revolution. I think, especially as time goes on, that feels at the very least very unrealistic. But I think that generally speaking, you're probably not going to get socialism, at least without violent conflicts at all, or like any conflict at all. So like, if we, I guess you can look at Chile for an example, like in the 70s when Allende, I think is how you say his name, was elected. He was elected and he wanted to nationalize sectors of the economy, and it was responded to with a coup. And I don't know the specific history. I don't know if this was unavoidable. I don't know if there was something Allende could have done. But I would say that generally speaking, if you are an elected socialist and you're immediately put under threat by the Western powers to, like, you know, oust you in a violent coup, then that probably means that you should have protection that's willing to be violent to protect the revolution or protect the new political order. But that's not necessarily a revolution. That's defending an election. So I'm going to put agree because I don't think that we can just elect socialists and be done with it. So, and I think that's what it's asking. The negative consequences of a revolution generally outweigh the advantages. Not if it's like successful in ousting the people in power. I mean, if we revolted in the United States and it didn't work, like, and we didn't take power, then yeah, that might be an excuse to like curb constitutional like freedoms or whatever, and that would be a bad thing. But like, I'm not a member of the school of thought that thinks, oh, if you upend the political system, then like a bunch of authoritarian strongmen are just gonna take the reins. I don't believe that, so I'm gonna put disagree. Liberal democracy is a viable way of achieving a socialist society. I think you can use it as a tool. I think using the electoral arena to sort of get the political parties' ideas out there, to expose the population to socialism, and also to win reforms by pressuring other candidates, which is a little bit hard to do in the US, but it's easier to do in like European style parliamentary systems. It's hard to say though, because it's hard to say like what exactly they're implying with this, because I don't think, again, that liberal democracy alone would achieve a socialist society. Like, I think that you do need, like, I don't know what the word would be, a fallback plan, and I think you need like dual action, if that makes sense. So I'm gonna say neutral, because I'm not against trying it, and I'm not against electoralism, but I don't think it's gonna work. A socialist revolution is made inevitable by the conditions of capitalism. Strongly agree. That's just kind of like Marxism. The idea that capitalism will create crises on its own through the sort of erosion of any liberal political freedom in order to sort of consolidate the power of capital. That's pretty basic. I don't really need to talk that much about that. Workplace democracy within capitalism is an acceptable alternative to a complete socialization of the economy. Is this like a Richard Wolff thing? I think they're kind of going for the idea of like doing worker co-ops, which they're nice. I think they're better than the current business model. That being said, though, it's not acceptable as a end goal. Like, I don't want just co-ops and then we're done. So I'm going to say disagree. Revolutionary violence is acceptable as long as the final outcome is positive. I mean, yeah. I mean, if you can say that the violence is the best option at the time, then I guess so. Like, the debate surrounding like Antifa right now, for example, is like whether or not what they're doing is actually productive. If you're on the left, not if you're like a conservative, but like if you're on the left, like the debate around Antifa, and not all of Antifa's practices. I mean, a lot of what the Antifa people do is like has nothing to do with violence whatsoever. But like what we're talking about is like punching Richard Spencer in the face on camera or something like that. When that happens, is it like a positive thing, and does that bring us closer to socialism? I don't know. But if you actually calculate successfully that a violent act, even if it's not in self-defense, is going to get us closer to a positive outcome, then I'm kind of okay with that. So I'm going to say agree. Redistributing wealth away from the wealthy through taxes is a viable way of defeating inequality. No, I don't think so. I think it is in theory. In theory, if you could just tax the rich down to like a modest level and then give that money to everybody else. But the fact is that right now, the rich people hold the power to shape government and the power to shape society. And that's sort of the main problem when it comes to capitalism, because you have like a dichotomy of liberal political freedoms where like the government can't step in and like shit on you or whatever. But then you have almost like anarchic, like unregulated just individualism in the business arena. And because of that, you create these extremely disproportionately powerful individuals like the tech CEOs or the oil CEOs. Like, just take oil for an example. So you might say that since the 1970s, it has been very clear that we need to do something on the front of carbon emissions in the climate and like making sure the climate is habitable and that conditions are good to facilitate human life and quality of life. And yet the oil companies like, I think it was Exxon was a big one. Like, they obfuscated that narrative. They suppressed the factual evidence that climate change, global warming, was happening and was a threat even back in the 70s. And so it was like the disproportionate power of this class that stopped positive change from happening. And so because of that, I don't think that this is a viable way of defeating inequality, because I don't think they'll let it happen. You know what I mean? So I'm going to say disagree. Modern social democracy is a betrayal of left-wing values. Not really a betrayal. I think social democrats are still left-wing, because ultimately I think we kind of want the same thing. Like, we want people to have a dignified life, and we want people not to be exploited or whatever. But the reality is that social democracy, I did a video on this, social democracy largely functions off of the imperialism of the West. And it largely, I don't know, I mean, you can say that it waters down the actual left, and I would probably agree with that. But like, if there's a social democratic party and a socialist party, I would work with the social democratic party. Like, I'm okay with that, because a lot of the time our goals do overlap. So I'm going to say neutral. I don't necessarily think it's like the worst thing in the world. Okay. Oppressed peoples have the right to engage in a violent uprising when all other options have been exhausted. Yes. And this is what I was getting at before, when you could calculate whether or not a violent act would be productive to a revolutionary goal. I think that if, like, I mean, I am not going to tell, like, a marginalized group of people how to do their shit. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, well, you should try this first. But if these people come intellectually to the conclusion that baked into the system is just an impossible hurdle to get their rights secured, then yeah, fuck shit up, dude. I don't know. Like, if you keep people, like, so, if you put people in such undignified conditions to the point where they can't even use your systems to try to voice their opinions. So, like, if you can't even have, like, actual not watered down, like, black activism, for example, in the United States without a huge, like, backlash, I guess, for example, then I seriously sympathize with the idea that, like, the system's just never going to open up to these people, and they're never going to open up to these ideas. And yeah, violent uprising. I mean, I understand, like, I get it. And if that's the case, then, like, if they actually have exhausted other options, because I think most people don't generally want to be in a revolution, then who am I to say, like, oh no, you have to be pacifist, you have to stop being violent or whatever. So yeah, I think that they definitely do have the right. I'm going to strongly agree to that. The means of production, such as factories and farms, must be publicly owned. I mean, I'm a socialist, yes. I think that the idea that we should allow a handful of individuals, and an ever-dwindling number of individuals, to control all of our production, including our food and necessity production, that's just ridiculous. So yes, strongly agree. Material conditions and needs are the dominant drive behind socioeconomic changes. I also agree with that. That's just materialism, which is Marxism, or part of Marxism. I don't think there's a whole lot to say here, but I will say that when you're looking at the actions of any human being or any government in the past, I think that you should also take into account, and I think any historian should do this, I think you should also take into account the reasons, not the reasons, but the conditions that led them to that decision. Because generally speaking, most people aren't comic book villains. Do you know what I mean? Most people. I mean, you could probably say, like, Adolf Hitler probably didn't have, like, a material reason to do the Holocaust, but, like, the Soviet Union, China, these governments or whatever, there at the very least were material conditions that led them to the original founding of these so-called authoritarian, like the centralized systems of government that they have. Like, there were reasons for that, even if you don't think that they're, like, good examples of, like, what we want now, which is probably a conversation I'll have in here eventually, then you should still recognize that, like, when you have imperialist powers, like, up your ass constantly for being left-wing, it makes sense that they had, like, strong militaries, and it made sense that they might have, like, censored some speech or whatever. Whether or not you think that they went too far or they crossed the line or whatever, like, there were still reasons for it, and I think it's really important to look at the world through that lens. So I'm going to strongly agree to that. Socialism can only be fully achieved in developed industrialized societies. Yes, but I think that a socialist government can industrialize, which is what they did in Russia. Like, I think that a very poor economy can decide it wants to be socialist and then industrialize in a planned, like, restricted way. So I'll agree to that. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs is a good principle. Yes, that's communism, bro. I think this is what we should be striving to attain, generally speaking. I think that people should give what they can, and they should feel obligated to sort of give what they can. And I think that no one should want. Like, I don't think that anybody should, at a time that's so rich as now, I don't think that anybody should be hungry or depressed even. Like, I think all of these things are generally avoidable, and we should try to avoid them. So this is a good principle. Strongly agree. It is possible to peacefully convince the ruling class to conform to a socialist society. No, because the ruling class is the ruling class, because we're not a socialist society. I don't think you can tell the ruling class to just fuck off, and they'll just do it. So I strongly disagree. Capitalism will induce its own demise through contradictions that result in crisis. Yes, but that doesn't mean there's no work to be done. It's more that the motivation to do the work that needs to be done, like party building or union organizing, that motivation comes from capitalism sucking. So, for example, if you suddenly get the inspiration to start a union at your workplace, usually, I mean, there are some people who are just communists and they want to do that, but like usually when a person does that, it's because their wages have been depressed, or it's because there have been layoffs or mass outsourcing or whatever. And all of those conditions are just kind of baked into the system, and it kind of creates the organization that threatens capitalism the most. So, strongly agree with that. Class conflict is a force that has influenced much of human history. Strongly agree. What the hell? The establishment of socialism is a gradual process rather than an instant or rapid one. So this sounds like a reform or revolution question. Like, it sounds like, can we incrementally get to socialism? I mean, okay. I don't think you can incrementally push the capitalist class out of power. I don't think that's going to happen. Like, I don't think if we just keep electing like social democrats into the Democratic Party, we'll eventually get actual socialists, and then we'll eventually kick out capitalists. Like, they're smarter than that, and they'll sense that threat coming. But I do think that once you've gotten past that first revolutionary hurdle, like once you've gotten to the point where the capitalists aren't the leading force in society anymore, then it's gradual. I mean, you have to industrialize, you have to defend yourself against, imperialist countries, you have to help other revolutionary movements, stuff like that. So that's gradual. So I'm going to put neutral because there are a few ways to look at the question. Society is chiefly driven by individuals and ideas. If this is like a collectivism versus individualism, not really. Not really. Hear me out. I think that one of the questions was talking about how material conditions sort of influence most things and are the driving force behind a lot of things. And I think that sort of leads me to sort of disagree with this idea. So while there have been brilliant people in the past, and while individuals do work on their own, it's largely the collection of laborers, and it's largely the collection of voters, and the collection of whatever, the sentiment of society, the consumer tastes in a market, whatever. It's all of those things that really drive decision making and really drive like change in general. So I'm going to say disagree. Total economic and social equality is realistically possible to achieve. Yeah. I don't view myself as like, what would the word be? Like, I don't think my ideas are totally unrealistic on like a human nature level. So yeah, I think that giving people the freedom to do what they want, in a sense, that is possible. And making sure that everybody has needs and to an extent wants met by virtue of being a human being, I think that's possible. So I'm going to strongly agree. An economy is generally designed better when it is organized bottom up rather than top down. I hate it when there's this dichotomy. So I don't know, man. Like, I think it's a loaded question to assume that anybody really, really wants, like, I want, one authoritarian structure to decide everything for everybody. No, I still want the input of like the workers, and I still want the input of the, regional planning people or whatever. But that being said, I don't think that you should just decentralize for the sake of decentralizing on an economic or really any level. I'm going to say, in the context of a socialist society, I'm going to disagree with this because I think I know what it's implying. And I'm not against, like, oh, here we are. I'm not against, like, national planning. Local planners rather than national planners are more efficient at running a planned economy. Why not both? Why not both? Yeah, just have local. This is what they did in the Soviet Union. This is what we can do now, especially with technology. Local planners inform the national planners who sign off on distribution. There's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to disagree. A centrally planned economy based around computers is a concept worth investigating. Why the hell would somebody not want to investigate this? Like, even like a capitalist economist should investigate this. Like, you should know what might work and what wouldn't. That's just academics. In underdeveloped societies, a centrally planned economy is the best way to make rapid progress. Yes. Generally speaking, yes. I think that sort of a reputation for this might be China, where China has kind of embraced market goals with the ostensible goal of building up capital or whatever, but that still follows a plan, and it's hard to say, I guess, but I think that when it comes to the best way, like with the least hurdles or whatever, if you have a reasonably competent planning structure, you can definitely very quickly artificially build up your society. So I'm going to agree with this. The principles of workplace democracy and self-management are desirable. Yes, because I believe in democracy. The state can be best defined as a monopoly on violence and oppression. God, what was that political theorist's name? I don't remember. He was German. Who knows? This was coined many times by many different people, and I agree. Generally speaking, the state can be defined as like a coercive entity. Otherwise, it doesn't really fulfill its role very well. So I'm going to agree with that. A highly centralized planned economy is not socialism, but rather state capitalism. That's a stupid question. I think that the theory of a state capitalist society, it depends on the behavior of the planning. Like, if the planning is effectively making the sort of lawmakers and policymakers just capitalists who are profiting, then yeah, I guess that's state capitalism, but not every planned economy is this, so strongly disagree. Bureaucracy and inefficiency are always inherent in centrally planned economies. Why? Like, I don't really understand this question. Like, even when you have a centrally planned system, it doesn't stop a large body of people from contributing. It's not like, I don't know, I feel like the theory here is that there's going to be like a bottleneck problem where like all of these complex economic variables are just going through like a council of 20 people or something who are in the planning agency. That doesn't have to happen. You can get the input from thousands of people across your country or whatever. So always inherent, that's just too absolute for me, and I would hope like even anarchists and people like that would agree, so strongly disagree. It is necessary to establish a dictatorship of the proletariat as a transitionary stage between capitalism and socialism. So this is a nerd question. The dictatorship of the proletariat is essentially turning the tables of power. So right now we have, in a way, a dictatorship of the capitalist class, where the final say on government is largely given to the capitalist class and their state organs. Basically, the idea of a dictatorship of the proletariat is a reversal of that, where in order to transition from this mode of production to the next, we need to have a time where the workers are the ones who control the narrative, who control the policies, etc. And to do that, you have to kind of crack down on the power that you just ousted, essentially. So I agree with this. I don't think that this is a good term to use these days, dictatorship of the proletariat, because I think it's loaded, and it sounds like you actually want like an autocracy or like a very, like a strongman dictator or something. You don't have to have that. You just have to have an apparatus which is capable of, I guess, securing the power of the workers in the economy. So I'm going to agree with that. The government should be capable of assigning individuals to workplaces. Yes. I mean, ideally they wouldn't have to. Ideally people can just choose. But capable, yeah. Like if there's a crisis or something, yes, I think the government should be able to say, like, we need doctors in this place, so we're going to send some doctors over here. So I'll agree. A world socialist republic is a realistic and desirable goal. Realistic in the future, yeah, but as of right now, I think even with this sort of international working class sort of theory that underlies Marxism, even with that, I think it's largely a national struggle on a lot of fronts. So realistic in the future, especially after large powers have transitioned. Desirable, definitely. So I'm going to say agree. Nationalism and patriotism are impulses that are unacceptable in a socialist society. Patriotism is a weird phrase. Like, when you say patriotism, is it solely being proud of where you are? ? Because I think that, say, for example, you were born into a successful socialist economy and you grow up and you're a socialist and you're enthusiastic about it and you're proud. You look back at their country's revolutionary history and you're like, wow, I'm very proud of this. I'm very proud to have been born here and I want to do more to contribute to this. Is that patriotism? Kind of. But nationalism, the idea that like we should prioritize our nation, that, or even the idea that nations should ideally exist, I don't know if that's good. So unacceptable, I mean, I'm going to say neutral, I think, but that's my nuance behind it. I think patriotism can be healthy. I think pride in your ideals, especially ones that have already been achieved, is healthy. I think that's, and also natural. But nationalism, I think, can be very harmful. The global socialist movement should be led by a single party or organization. Global? Kind of, maybe. I don't know. I mean, even like the evil, scary Stalinists didn't really do this. Like, there were still like communist parties of each country, and there was like the International, but like it wasn't like the Communist Party of the Soviet Union Vietnam branch or whatever. It was just the Vietnamese Workers' Party or whatever it was called. So it shouldn't be led by a single party globally, but on a national level, yeah, I think on a national level it should probably be a single party. So what they're going for, I think, is like the question of like party versus like disorganized, well, okay, that's loaded, party versus decentralized organization. And because of that implication, I'm going to probably say that I agree, but I don't think it should necessarily be global. Foreign officials have no right to dictate policy in another country. No right ever. I think I'll disagree with this because I do think that there are like humanitarian crises that might demand intervention. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily American intervention. I think America blows. And I think that a big part of the reason why is that America's intentions are just to maintain its own power. But if you had like, especially in a socialist age, if you had like a collection of countries that see like a genocide happening, I don't think they should just sit back and be like, oh, I guess we can't do anything. I mean, that's another country. We can't fuck with them. No, that's a little dumb. So no right, like on a fundamental level, no, I don't agree with that. Open borders between like-minded socialist countries is desirable. Like-minded socialist countries kind of seals the deal for me. Yes, I do think that workers should be able to move wherever they want between like-minded states. But I think that restriction of immigration from a socialist country to the West might sometimes be necessary. But since this is like-minded socialist countries, I strongly agree. Any socialist country should be dedicated to exporting their ideology abroad. Yes, they should arm revolutionary movements. They should fund parties across the world. Absolutely. People of similar cultures should unite in federations or confederations. To do what? I mean, sure, if you have like a cultural identity and you want to like unite behind that, I mean, go ahead. but for what? Like, I don't think that we should, like, segregate cultures, and I don't think that, like, different cultures are incapable of working on, like, a class-based basis or something. So I guess I'll disagree with that. That's a weird question. The international proletariat belongs to no country. In terms of literally the fact that they're just equally oppressed by wage labor, yeah, they're an international entity, but there are material differences between a worker living in the United States and a worker living in, like, Iraq. You know what I mean? Like, and I think it would probably be hard on a lot of levels for, like, an Iraqi worker to identify with a U.S. worker, like, just because of everything that, like, just because of the power difference between countries. So I get the ideal, but I think that the way the world works right now and the way that the world is unequal, like, some countries are much richer than others, I think that the character of the proletariat class in country X versus country Y, I think that it's just different, so I'll disagree. National liberation or self-determination for all peoples is a good concept. Yes. I think this debate was had like 100 years ago between, like, communists. Yeah, I think that when you look at, like, Palestine, for example, I'm not in love with the prevailing liberatory ideology there, but, like, I'm not going to wait for, like, a communist Palestinian party to take the reins of the liberation movement there to support it, because I still oppose Israeli colonization, and I still oppose Zionism, and I still oppose everything that's going on there. And you can say that about decolonization. Like, I support decolonization even if it's not under a red flag. I think it would be better under a red flag, but who am I to say that like what is the alternative here? Should I say that, like, Israel should just be allowed to continue what it's doing until Palestine, like, decides that it wants to be socialist or something? No, I would never say that. So definitely a good concept to support liberation, like, as a concept on its own. I would be willing to sacrifice economic resources in my home country in order to help other countries. I mean, depending on the situation, yeah, especially since I'm an American and America is, like, very rich. I don't think we lose much by exporting our economic power as a socialist country, like, not now, but if America was under a left-wing government and decided to help, like, I don't know, a natural disaster abroad, then of course I'd be willing to. So I agree. Socialist political parties should participate in liberal democratic elections. Absolutely, yes. I think that it's great for publicity. I think it's great for charismatic leaders to get the ideas of socialism into the political arena. I think it's good to pressure other parties. I think it's good to rally people to join direct action that a party might be doing. Absolutely. There's very few downsides to that. Trade unions and workers' councils should form the basis of a socialist society. Okay, I don't want to say no. I don't want to say, like, I hate unions or I hate workers' councils, but ultimately, I think that the syndicalist or council communist approach to things, it's a little strange because it tends to be proposed as an alternative to Marxism-Leninism, and it tends to be proposed as an alternative to centralization. And that's weird because I'm not against a workers' council. I'm not against a trade union, but I think alone, without, like, a governing body at the top, which doesn't have to be a communist party, it can just be like a union of unions or like a large collection of the councils, without, like, some kind of central basis at the top of that sort of implementing their decisions, it seems a little ineffective. And because of that, forming the basis of a socialist society on their own, I'm going to disagree with, even though I don't think that they shouldn't exist. The leadership of political parties in progression towards socialism will always lead to authoritarianism. The leadership of political parties in the progression towards socialism will always lead to authoritarianism. Not in the modern implication of this question. Like, I could be an annoying like nerd and be like, well, Engels said in the 1800s that authoritarianism is necessary in a revolution. Anybody who does that is so annoying. I think that authoritarianism, in the sense that like you like totalitarianism, like, oh my god, the government controls everything, they control like everything I do at home, I'm not allowed to talk to my family about my opinions and all that. No, political parties or central organizations don't always lead to this like big brother's always watching state or whatever. No, I don't agree with that. Strongly disagree. Democratic centralism is an authoritarian organizational structure that disregards the masses. How can anyone believe this? So democratic centralism is a method of organizing that Lenin, I think Lenin did it first, sort of came up with. And you can use this anywhere. You can use this at a fucking book club. It's the idea that you have democratic debate in the question of making decisions. So let's say we're deciding whether we want to run a candidate in an election, right? Let's say that you and me, dear viewer, are in a socialist party together in the United States, and we're deciding, should we run somebody for governor? Would that be worth our time? We hash it out. Let's say I believe, yes, we should run a candidate for governor. You believe no. We hash it out. We decide, we put all of our arguments out there. There's a debate, and then all of our members put it to a vote, and I lose. And it turns out, no, we shouldn't run a candidate for governor because the people of the party, the people of the organization decided, nah, I don't think that this is worth our time. I, under a democratic centralist organization, wouldn't then be allowed to just go run for governor. And I wouldn't be allowed to say take my voting block of friends and just be like, well, we're just going to do it on our own. Fuck you guys. And that's what democratic centralism is. It's the idea that like there's democratic debate, there's democratic decision-making, but once that decision-making is done, it gets implemented. That the will of the people, the will of the members of that organization has to be implemented in a centralist way, and everybody is bound to listen to the will of that party, even if you were on the opposite side of the prevailing decision. That doesn't disregard the masses at all. That is not authoritarian at all. That's the best way to organize democracy. The best way to organize democracy is a way where the people's decisions are actually implemented, and you're not just in an endless debate of like how to implement a decision. That would be ridiculous. So strongly disagree. That is a ridiculous view to have. Only a mass workers' party can achieve any meaningful long-term goals. Yes. Individual unions are nice. Individual regional, like, political movements are nice, and I do think that they can get local changes, but meaningful long-term changes on a high level, it has to be like a movement of all people, a movement of all workers in that country. So strongly agree. Mass spontaneous actions are more effective than carefully planned actions. No. And I think this is strange. I think that there is something to be said for spontaneous actions. Like the George Floyd protests were spontaneous. It was a person in the age of social media was extrajudicially killed by the police. Everybody saw that. Everyone was pissed. Everyone started marching. There wasn't much planning that went into that. And that, I think that is beautiful. I think that is the best, one of the best expressions of democratic power there is. That being said, what the ideal situation would be for an organization to plan around that anger. So you would say, okay, the country's really fucking pissed off right now. How about we go out and we, as an organization with our banners and whatever, march in this place and talk to people and try to get people to be a part of our organization so that we can affect more change. And it's in a way you'd be utilizing the spontaneity of these protests in your plan. So I don't think that these two things are mutually exclusive. I don't think that nothing should ever be spontaneous ever. And I think a lot of anything that gets done is born of spontaneity, but spontaneity on its own isn't going to solve problems. So they're not more effective. So I disagree. The fact that so many workers vote for bourgeois parties over socialist parties is proof that party politics are no longer relevant. No. I think that party politics are relevant. I think what the fuck's going on in government is always relevant, but I think what it's asking is like, a communist party should just like say, okay, fuck elections, we're not even going to bother anymore because all these people are so dumb. I don't believe that. And I think that what can be learned can also be unlearned. And I think that over time there has been conditioning of, especially the American, my God, Americans, the American working class would probably believe that, like, I don't know, man, like free stamps is like socialism. And the government's coming to like euthanize your grandma or something. But that being said, man, I mean, in a very short period of time, Americans have opened up to ideas like universal healthcare and ideas like living wages and free university and things along those lines in a very short time. And no, that's not socialism, but it is a shift to the left that we haven't seen probably since the Vietnam War. And there's something to be said for that. And that was attained largely through the involvement in party politics, the people's involvement in party politics. So I don't think it's not relevant. And I think it's sad, the state of a lot of Western working classes and how they're just really not for socialism right now. But I don't think that that means that socialists should never operate in the political or like the party politics arena. So disagree. Socialist organizations are generally better off when organized loosely and decentrally. Generally, no. I would say generally, no. I'm sure there are situations where this is preferable or whatever. But I think like the DSA is a pretty good example of this. The DSA is a little strange because you have all of these chapters that are given so much autonomy to kind of do whatever they want. And because of that, you have social democratic DSAs, you have anarchist DSAs, some of them are pretty Marxist DSAs. And when that happens, it's hard for like the national DSA, like steering committee or whatever they call themselves, to like go on the news or whatever and be like, this is what the DSA stands for. Because, and a great example of this, do you remember when the New York City DSA said that we should abolish prisons or something like that? And then like the head of the DSA or some like big figure in the DSA went on like Tucker Carlson or something. And Tucker Carlson was like, oh, well, does the DSA stand for this then? And he shows the tweet of the New York City DSA saying we want to abolish prisons. And whether or not you want to abolish prisons, that's not the conversation right now. But like there's just so much disunity there, because what is the opinion of one chapter might not necessarily be the opinion of the national committee, the national DSA. And that's just inefficient, man. Like, it's hard, like when you don't have like common goals and like half of your organization is just Bernie supporters and the other half wants like a complete reconstitution of society, you need some centralization there. You need some more planning there, and you need some more vetting there. So I'm going to disagree with this. I don't think that it's generally better to be decentral. Trade unionism has been largely corrupted by the ruling class and is no longer a viable structure for socialist organization. Well, I don't think trade unionism on its own was ever a viable structure to, like, overthrow capitalism. But when you look at, like, American unions and how they've been subverted and infiltrated and stuff over time, I think that you can be very cynical about union organizing, but I think that you can take it back. And I think that it's still good for giving workers this idea that, oh, wait, we're the working class, we're really powerful, and we can affect change pretty easily when we work together or whatever. I think unions are very valuable in that sense. So, yeah, they're definitely viable as like a part of the strategy to build socialism, for sure. So, disagree. Climate change is a major global threat that all socialists must fiercely combat. Yes, I don't want to flood like all coasts. Measures to address environmental issues are unacceptable if they result in a significant decrease in production and quality of life. Oh, that's broad. Okay. It depends on a couple of factors. It depends on the magnitude of the environmental issue, and it depends on the magnitude of the decrease in quality of life. So if, like, if all people have to go without power or something so that, like, I don't know, one stream isn't polluted and like the stream isn't like a major water source or something, that would be an example where I would be like, no, you can find a better way, or you can just kind of prioritize people's like access to electricity or something. So I don't think I would make a hard and fast rule like this, where it's like, it's always unacceptable, or the reverse, it's always acceptable. So I'm going to say neutral, because you just need more information there. It is foolish to expect renewable energy sources to be able to replace fossil fuels. No, it's not. Industrial farming practices must be abolished, even if it leads to lower outputs. I don't want people to go hungry because of this, but I mean, industrialized farming has consequences. I know that. But I think you should keep it in place while you figure out a way to get high outputs, like in an ethical, sustainable way. Industrialized farming practices must be abolished, even if it leads to lower outputs. Neutral. I'm sorry. Like, you just need more information. Like, how much? Like, are people going to go hungry because of that? Because if so, then no. It will be important to implement extensive environmental protections as a part of achieving socialism. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, on the climate change level, definitely, because that's like a threat to human civilization. But like when a species might go extinct or something, which is sad. I mean, I don't want like a cute panda to die or whatever. I think there are times when environmental protections like that even can be relevant in socialist organizing. And the question of animal rights is, of course, always in the political sphere. Like, how much, like, what is the value of the life of an animal versus the life of a human? Are they equal? Are they not? You know, all of those questions. So it'll be part of socialist society, I'm sure. So agree. Experimental, environmentally friendly food sources like cultured meat are worth investing in. Again, this is like the centrally planned computer AI economy question a while ago. Like, if you can investigate something's efficacy, do it. That's like the scientist's job, to investigate that. And investing in it, yeah, if this can become a viable alternative to the pollutive industry of meat, like, wow, I'm blanking on the word, like livestock agriculture, then yes, we should invest in that. So agree. All right, so there might have been like a skip in the recording there. I got up and got water, and it was just an instant for you because of technology. It's wonderful. Personal motor vehicles such as cars should be replaced by free public transport. Yes, but under the condition that the public transport is plentiful and accessible enough that cars are just largely not needed for the majority of people. Like, the reason that I have a car is because there isn't public transportation to get me to campus, to get me to work, to get me to whatever. But if there were, then I wouldn't want a car. So I think if you can get to a point where public transport does phase out cars, that's desirable. I think that's a very good goal to have. So strongly agree. It is acceptable for humanity to suffer to some notable extent, to some notable extent in order to preserve the natural ecosystem. No, I think, I don't know, maybe this is like unpopular, but like, I mean, a squirrel is cute or whatever, but I want to preserve ecosystems, like, because the preservation of some ecosystems is necessary to the continuation of human life, because humans are a part of nature. You know what I mean? But I see like the appeal when there isn't a big cost to like stopping a species from going extinct, or like doing animal advocacy. But I don't like want to significantly diminish humans' quality of life solely on non-human variables, like solely to protect things that don't really affect human survival and human civilization. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense? Because I know, and I'm not an ecologist, but like, I don't want to just destroy the ecosystem in the short term, because that would very much impact humans in the future, because we are a part of our environment. But I am sure that there are ecosystems with very cute critters in them that would not threaten humanity's continued existence or anything like that. And I don't want to prioritize that ecosystem over humanity itself. So I'm going to say disagree. We must radically alter our food consumption in order to limit the exploitation of nature. No, we should alter our food consumption because of the pollution that comes from meat I keep wanting to say meat manufacturing. What do we call it? Meat, like, agriculture? Whatever. When you fucking raise a cow, the pollution that comes from that, we should be looking for alternatives so that we don't, like, exacerbate climate change. But the exploitation of nature, it's in our nature to exploit nature. That's how humans are humans. We make tools, we build shelters, whatever. We're exploiting nature by doing that. So this is just a dumb view, in my opinion. We must radically alter our food consumption in order to limit the exploitation of nature. No, we should radically alter our food consumption to preserve human civilization. So, disagree. Human population growth must be curbed. No. To prevent an ecological disaster. No. There's no evidence that overpopulation will be a problem anywhere in the near future. Strongly disagree. Malthusian ideas have been disproved time and time again. Some small-scale destruction of nature is acceptable if it notably benefits humanity. Absolutely. Humanity must return to primitive ways of the past to overcome long-term climate issues. No. Why? No, this is not necessary right now. I think radical reorganization of our energy consumption and production and whatever is required, but not to the point of, like, living in a hut and, like, I don't know, eating stew over a fire or something. No, like, we can still have a house, we can still have the internet or whatever. I don't know if that's what this is asking, but I don't know what, like, primitive ways, like, how far are we going with that, my friend? Strongly disagree. We must accept that the socialist states of the 20th century failed to seriously address environmental issues. In a sense, I mean, this kind of excludes China, doesn't it? Am I going to get, like, yelled at by the people I show this video to because I am, like, including China in this? I know that the Soviet Union did some, like, environmentally harmful stuff. Like, I know that. And I think we can criticize that for sure. And because of that, I want to agree to this question. But also, we still have socialist states. So, I mean, they're not failing as much now. Like, China is addressing climate change now to an extent. I don't know. I'll say agree, I guess, because I think that changes can be made everywhere in terms of, like, carbon emissions and stuff, both in the past Soviet Union and also in present China and whatever. The oppression of LGBTQ plus people is a major issue that needs to be seriously addressed, obviously. Traditional gender roles such as women being homemakers need to be overcome. Yes, women are workers and people too, and I think they should have the same rights as everybody else. And I think that not only is it, like, a human rights issue when women are, like, confined to this single productive activity. I don't even understand why that would be a thing. But it's also just inefficient. Like, what? Like, a woman, we know that a woman is capable of being a very brilliant person who leads in a field or something like that. And you want to say, no, I think half of the human race should just always be, like, a cook or, like, a child rearer. That's just very dumb in the face of human organization. And it would have a very significant, like, it would stunt our growth as a species very significantly to say that half of the human fucking race should never pursue a career outside of, like, you know, a housewife. I think that's unbelievable. So it needs to be overcome. Absolutely, strongly agree. Marriage is a patriarchal social construct that should be phased out. I think the expectation of marriage should be phased out. I think that people viewing commitment, like the highest commitment to another person, as being marriage and having to, like, you may kiss the bride and all that, I think that expectation is a little dumb and limiting. But I don't think that marriage itself... Okay, I think marriage is harmful when it's the only like end to a relationship, when it's like the only social norm there is. But if you have marriage amongst other things like polygamy or just relationships without marriage or friends with benefits or whatever people want to do, if you have marriage along with those things, then marriage isn't harmful. So I'll say neutral, I guess, because again, more information needed. Abortion, oh boy, is an immoral act that should be banned or significantly limited. Absolutely not. Abortion is a right. Abortion is a fundamental question of control of the pregnant person's body. And I'm sorry to tell you that a fetus is not a human being. This is not murder. Cancel me, whatever. I'm saying it. Abortion is not a problem. Sorry to tell you. Significantly limited, absolutely not. Strongly disagree. Religions overall have a mostly positive effect and should remain influential in society. No, I don't think they have a mostly positive effect. I think it's mostly negative, but I don't want to like genocide a culture. I don't want to say like we're going to burn down all religious institutions or whatever, because spirituality has varying effects on the behavior of people, and I think it would just be ridiculous to like force everybody to be atheist or something. That being said, though, religion is not a positive thing, in my opinion. I think it's overall had a pretty net negative on society. I think religion has... I think a materialist perspective on religion is very important, because in a way, it's almost like an alternative to radically changing what is in front of you. So the idea that there's an afterlife, the idea that there is like repayment for being an empathetic good person in this life, the idea that there's like a person, a being watching over you and looking out for you at all times is all very comforting. And the reason people need comfort like that is because the world fucking sucks. Like we have to find a way to rationalize why there's so much terrible things in this world, so many terrible things in this world. We have to find a way to rationalize the permanence of death. We have to find a way to rationalize the misery that comes with a lot of life, especially in like developing countries. And I think that while that's understandable on a psychological level, and while I'm not going to yell at a religious person for being religious, I think on an objective aggregate level, analyzing religion for what it is very important, and it is just putting the veil over the eyes. It's blurring and obfuscating the vision of people who could otherwise be trying to make this world that we live in right now heaven, making this world a place where you want for nothing, and a place where you're able to eat and drink and have shelter and have fun and have friends and things like that. That's what I want on earth. Like, I understand that people want a heaven, and I understand all of that, but I think that it's more important to focus on changing this world for the better. And I think that that's kind of made harder when everybody thinks that it's just better on the other side or something like that. So I think that religions are mostly negative in that sense. So I'm going to disagree. Minority populations should receive special legal protections. In the sense that I think people should be protected classes, yes. I think that discrimination against minorities is going to be a problem for some time, and because of that, they need special protections, as well as reparations when necessary. So special legal protections, definitely agree. 69, nice. A socialist government has no right to disrupt religious or cultural traditions in any situation. In any situation? No. I mean, I think even the capitalist government had the right to stop church services from happening during the COVID-19 pandemic. So on a socialist level, like if you have, so a lot of people like look at like the Soviet Union, and one of like the big things that they think is like terrible is like how they treated the churches. And listen, on the scale of their entire history, that is a long conversation, and this video is already like an hour long. But on the scale of specific acts that the church was doing in Russia, they were very anti-communist. They were very antagonistic towards the Soviet governments. They were a lot of the time monarchist, like openly monarchist, czarist institutions. And when that happens, yeah, they need to be taken down a peg, because, like, I don't know. I don't want to commit myself to, like, constantly saying, or to, like, for the entirety of, like, a socialist power or whatever, that they can never step into a holy building, that they can never regulate holy practices or whatever. I don't think you should commit yourself to that, because there will be situations where it might be necessary to take action against people who happen to be hiding behind religious institutions. So I'm going to say disagree on this. Prisons are oppressive and antiquated institutions that need to be abolished. I haven't read Angela Davis. I would like to read Angela Davis. I think she talks on this a lot in one of her most famous books, one of her most famous works. I don't know if it's a book or an essay or what. So I'm going to give the disclaimer that I'm kind of uninformed when it comes to the question of prison abolition. What I know is that private prisons are ridiculous, and prison structures under an unjust system are going to be used for unjust purposes. So that's a question of who is imprisoned, how they're imprisoned, and for what reason are they imprisoned. Whether or not imprisonment shouldn't exist is a question that I'm not really prepared to answer. I will say that I am very open to the idea of jailing members of the capitalist class if they're, like, seriously disrupting things. I'm fine with jailing, like, rapists. But if this question is asking me, like, should we never confine a person who did a seriously bad thing or something like that, or who was a threat to, like, justice or something like that? I don't know if I agree with that, but I also haven't read that side of the argument. So I'll say for now I disagree. Again, willing to learn, but I'll disagree. Policies that enable mass immigration are naive and should not be implemented. Enable mass immigration? I feel like the only argument about a policy that enables mass immigration that I hear is when, like, a Western country cares for its people, and then the people from the poor countries are like, we want to be cared for. So on that level, I would rather every country care for its citizens so that it wouldn't require you leaving your country and going to a place you've never known just so you can have, like, healthcare. So I don't know, man. Like, I don't think in a just world where people were provided for no matter where they live, and people can be okay no matter where they live, I don't think mass immigration would ever happen if that were the case. So I think we should be fighting for global justice, and mass immigration shouldn't really be a question on our minds. So I strongly disagree with this. Last question. Look at us. You cannot achieve a socialist society without also making significant social progress. I guess this is talking about, like, social issues. Yeah, so I think that even the places of the 20th century, the socialist countries of the 20th century, made significant social progress. Like, even if we look at them now through our lens today, and we say that, like, oh my God, they were, like, too anti-gay, they were in some cases anti-woman or whatever, I think that comparing them to what they were before, there was significant social progress, because you're radically calling into question everything when you're a revolutionary movement. And so the idea that, like, marriage will be questioned, like, women's rights will be questioned, racial issues will be questioned or called into question, all of these things, that's, like, necessarily going to happen when you have, like, a movement as radical as communism or as socialism, right? So I think that my caveat here is that I don't think society has to be like fully like end stage progressive, like everybody is totally free to do whatever they want to be socialist. I think that's still an ideal that I have. Like I still want like equality and justice for LGBT and like people of color and stuff like that. But I don't think that that was like, because I still consider the Soviet Union to have been a socialist country, right? So when I say that, they were not as like protecting of LGBT rights as I think they should have been, and yet they were still socialist. So I don't think that you can only be a socialist society when everybody is provided for in that sense. And what I would rather do is build a socialist economy which will bring progress on its own socially, and then also combat those social issues from the socialist perspective. I would want a communist party in power, and then in that communist party, there should be advocacy for minority rights, for freedom to express your sexuality, your gender identity, whatever. Those should be accepted within that communist party. So it's a weird question, but I'll say agree, because I do think that social progress is important, and I think that's what it's going for. Okay, so revolutionary versus reform. This is about what I would say, because I think revolutionary is necessary to achieve the society I want, but I think that reform is nice, and I think that it can be good in the short term. Scientific versus utopian socialism, which is the question of like Marxism versus like pre-Marxist socialism. I agree with this. I am a Marxist. Centralist versus decentralism. I also agree with this. I think that loosely connected organizations aren't adequate to like topple the existing global order. Internationalist versus nationalist. I think that I understand why nationalism exists, or I understand why patriotism exists, or why nations themselves exists. But ultimately, this is an international. Capitalism is international. Therefore, the fight against capitalism should also be international. Party versus union. Yes, I think that it doesn't have to be a party. It can be like a big thing of unions or whatever you want. But there needs to be a central body implementing the decisions of the people from the top. I think that's important. I'm neutral when it comes to production versus nature. Yeah, I think that given some of the questions, I see why this makes sense. Climate change is an existential threat, by the way. And the reason I want to combat that in the most radical way possible is because it threatens humanity. So while I can look at like, and I know that this is like maybe a bad way to frame this, but like I can look at like a cute animal being hurt and I can be sad, but ultimately my goal is to protect humanity first and then help these other living creatures like second, because I am a human and I think that the consciousness of humanity is largely what drives these moral conversations to begin with. And while I don't want to unnecessarily inflict pain on anything, I think it's important to understand that we do come first. Humans are, as far as we know, I mean, I don't know, dolphins or something might be like very intelligent animals, but like, as far as we know, humans are the only like very, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'd be interested in reading about this, but like seriously self-aware, seriously highly intelligent animals that are capable of having the moral conversation in the first place of what life counts and what life matters and what life, you know, whatever. So I guess does that make me, it's like it's like humanism, but not like the humanism of like history. It's like I prioritize humans first, and if that means protecting nature, of course, I would love to. Very progressive. I mean, yeah, I'm a member of the modern left. This shouldn't come as a huge surprise. I believe in trans rights. I believe in liberation of people of color and oppressed groups across the world. It's 2020. You should too. Closest match, Orthodox Marxism. Okay. Orthodox Marxism is a form of Marxism. I have to cough, one sec. Okay. Orthodox Marxism is a form of Marxism which adopts views that conform to Marxist theory as it was originally written, particularly on the topic of dialectical materialism. Orthodox Marxists are highly revolutionary and internationalist and hold that non-industrial societies are incapable of achieving socialism. I don't know if I agree with this result. I identify as a Marxist-Leninist, generally speaking, which was a close match, it seems. Marxism-Leninism is a form of Marxism that was forged in the 20th century in the Soviet Union. MLs heavily favor the use of a communist political party as the platform for both achieving revolution and establishing socialism. Many Marxists are somewhat more nationalistic. Many Marxist-Leninists are somewhat more nationalistic. God, I can't read. And patriotic than other Marxists, and they may favor industrial progress over environmental goals. I think that's where I am, actually, but I mainly did this not to like find out what I am. I know what I am, but to sort of give my opinions on some of the very pressing questions that were brought up in this test. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I would love to talk about my probably controversial opinions in this here video. So thank you, everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye.